ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has described his purported counter-suspension by suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule as vengeful spite. This is contained in the ANC's court papers filed this week for Magashule's court bid challenging his temporary suspension by the party. Magashule was handed a suspension letter after the party implemented its step-aside resolution, asking members of the party who are facing criminal charges to step down from their positions. He has indicated that he will appeal the suspension, but the ANC says there is no provision in its constitution to appeal a temporary suspension. The matter will be heard in the Johannesburg High Court on Tuesday. To get an understanding on what this means, I'm joined by legal expert Benedict Phiri. Benedict, a very good morning to you, and thank you for your time. President Cyril Ramaphosa has filed his answering affidavit to suspended ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule, and he says that Magashule's letter of suspension to him was based on falsehoods. What do you make of this communication?
I think it's a very strong counter-argument to the application that was brought by Ace Magashule. I think the president being very clear that Ace Magashule had no grounds to suspend him on a number of bases. And I think the first is that he was not authorized by any structure of the ANC to raise that suspension. Over and above that, if you look at Rule 2570, the step-aside rule, it's very clear that the people that should step aside are only those that have been indicted in criminal proceedings, which isn't the case with the president. So any sort of allegation around CR17 being tainted in illegalities is also far-fetched and not well-founded, given that a court has set aside the public protector's report, even though it's pending appeal at the Constitutional Court. Over above that, I think the president also elaborates how he's interacted with the ANC's Integrity Commission, and that even the Integrity Commission doesn't find a basis for the president to step aside or be suspended in the manner that Ace Magashule has done so.
Ramaphosa has also said that as far as he knows, there is no structure in the ANC that ever seriously suggested that he was guilty of any criminal conduct when it comes to the CR17 campaign. What does this remark by Magashule then mean for perhaps himself when it comes to the evidence that would need to be submitted?
Yeah, the nature of these proceedings that Mr. Magashule has brought means that actually they just can only be decided on the papers. We're not in a trial scenario where there'll be oral evidence that's been led. So the court will then have to assess, based on, the annexures that Mr. Magashule has actually put in his affidavit and what the president and Jesse Duarte have done in their affidavits, what's actually the truth, or rather what's the most likely scenario. Both of them actually, reach out to the ANC Constitution as support for their positions. But I think from the president's perspective, he's put a really strong case to suggest that the suspension of Mr. Magashule was actually by the book, especially when you read his affidavit together with Jesse Duarte.
What for you stands out as a cause of concern when it comes to the two parties and the interaction that we've seen playing out in the public?
I think the concern really is that what we're seeing is that so-called factional battles are playing themselves out in court processes. Definitely Mr. Magashule's affidavit speaks to a factional agenda, and that, his being stepped aside is actually related to the factional plays that play out within the ANC. Jesse Duarte and the president sticking to the rules per se and saying that these rules have nothing to do with Mr. Magashule and actually have to do with the implementation of the ANC's rules.
The court has also heard about the seriousness of Ace Magashule's charges, saying and warning that he shouldn't trivialize them. When it comes to perhaps, you speak of factional battles on one end and you speak of the courts. When it comes to a matter as heated as this one and what's at stake for both parties, what would your legal advice be as this matter now heads to the courts?
Sorry, Mpo, if you can kindly repeat that question, I missed that one.
I'm speaking about the seriousness of the charges when it comes to suspended ANC Secretary General, what he has to answer to, and the implication of his accusations to President Cyril Ramaphosa, how that bodes on a legal perspective in terms of reputational damage on any of the two parties.
Yes, I mean, President Ramaphosa coming out very strongly to say the charges that Mr. Magashule is facing are actually serious and fall straightly within the ambit of Rule 2570, and that actually goes to the integrity of the ANC, and the ANC being seen as dealing strongly with corruption. You know, he traces the history of the resolutions and how they've actually been seen to be implemented through the various structures of the ANC, and how this is actually not only a matter for the integrity of the ANC, but also for the country. And he actually says that it's very ironic that Mr. Magashule now, on the one hand, says that corruption is a problem for the country, but at the same light cannot see how being faced with such serious charges and indictments of corruption against him does not see fit to step aside. So I think, it doesn't bode well from the sense that we see the ANC as struggling to rid itself of the corruption within the party. But definitely, I think it shows that the president at least is taking this with a serious light in the right direction.
Very well. Thank you so much for your analysis, legal expert Benedict Phiri, giving us some insight on the answering affidavit by ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa.